We're in the bug working phase. Huge improvements on the Grom Reaper today. All right, so today we're fine-tuning the Grom Reaper. I want to adjust the positioning of the brake pedal. We're going to revisit the seat suspension, and the big one, we're going to revisit the engineering on the front brake. This brake pedal placement, it is too high. I want it to be lower like that, because when I actually sit on it, that pedal placement is kind of an awkward spot. I'd like it to be down here more, so I can just swing my foot over and press it down. Now I have to bring my foot way back, and I just don't have that kind of flexibility. That means shortening this bar here. Alright, so I need to just chop this tube at some point and then weld it back together. And I think I'm trying to figure out how long I want this to be. Yeah, somewhere like there. That equates to about 3/4 of an inch. So I've gone ahead and marked this. I'm just going to move back a little bit off of this thing here, cut straight into this tube here, section out a piece, put this back together, and weld it right up here. Now I've got two pieces. I'm going to go ahead and clean these things up on the belt sander to make sure they're nice and flat. Cleaning them up for welding, get this paint off of there, and we'll go ahead and weld them together. Alright, so now when we put these guys together, I'm going to go ahead and groove them so that when we line them up, there'll be a nice little sort of groove divot in between them, a little V valley that I can then fill that with weld material. There's a little groove in there, a little valley, and now we can fill that with weld material, and this will be a lot stronger. I've got a nice little piece of angle iron here, and this will keep it nice and straight. Just clamp these things down, tack this on here, and then weld it up. And I had thoughts of grinding this thing down when I was done so it was nice and smooth, but I don't have much extra reinforcement on this thing, so probably just gonna leave it as is. It's fairly flat and smooth already. Paint this back up again, clean it up, paint it up, and it should be good to go back on the bike. Alright, so here's our finished rod. I'm gonna go ahead and reinstall this guy. Alright, now I also want to bleed out this master cylinder for the rear brake because it looks like it works, but it doesn't actually work. This thing does like absolutely nothing. Alright, so I've got my master cylinder in my vise, some brake fluid, and I've got a little pokey stick thing here that I can stick the air bubbles out of here. Alright, so what I've determined is that this master cylinder is frozen up on the inside, which is kind of surprising considering this bike doesn't have that many miles on it. I don't know how this happens, but I managed to free this stuff up a little bit on this end. But I can see that the little plunger inside is not moving at all. Probably just order another one because these are pretty cheap. Alright, so I went ahead and I bought another master cylinder. Just a cheap one, you know, it's like $15 off of Amazon. And it's so cheap, I don't like it. I mean, it's very cheap. Instead, I've gone ahead and I've taken apart the OEM one, cleaned this thing out inside here a little bit. There was some gunk in there, and then the piston, like we mentioned, we saw earlier, was just stuck in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean this guy up and see if we can just make this work. There's a little spring that goes in there. Just sort of de-gunk it, make sure everything is lubed up with brake fluid, and we'll put it back together. See how it goes. See if we just can't save ourselves $15. Woo-wee! Alright, so we got it back together, and so far, so good. It seems to be working. Alright, so that means I'm back to bench bleeding here. See if we can get this to work. I can see the little air bubbles in there now. Yeah, I should start getting fluid out the end here like it should. I want to get these air bubbles out still. And we've just put a bunch of fluid in there already. Alright, so the rear brake is finally buttoned up on this thing, I believe. I've just gone ahead and bled out all the air and whatnot. And we have a nice hard pedal feel now, which is awesome. So I think it might actually function. I'm not sure how great of stopping power we've got on this little tiny rotor, but I think it might work for what it's supposed to be. All right, so another thing I want to adjust while we're out here is this seat. Again, for the show, I couldn't find this little linkage part here, so I had to improvise and use what I had for the prototype. That was the only one I could find. I actually have ones that are a little bit longer, because at this point, that linkage, it's a little bit, it works, but it's pretty strong spring there still, so we need a little bit more leverage. So to do that, I've got some longer links here. So I'll extend this thing out a little bit more, about another inch. So go ahead and swap those out. Let's go ahead and swap in my new ones. All right, so there's our new linkage on there. Let's try out our seat. Now we have a little bit more spring to the seat. All right, and then the big correction I need to make on the Grom is on the front brake. So our front brake, the way we got this thing set up, is that the actual caliper itself, the caliper mount here, is connected to the actual linkage there, and we don't want that, because when you brake, it'll pull the suspension and rotate this linkage, which we don't want. We want to divorce the brake caliper from the suspension linkage. Here's part of the suspension linkage right here coming down, and I welded the caliper mount directly to that. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to cut that off, and we're going to move the caliper mount to this spacer. This guy right here, this little silver bit in the middle. We do this silver bit in the middle and make this into a moving piece with some bearings inside of it. All right, so we've got our piece here out. This is the caliper bracket portion right here, and this is the linkage portion right there. I'm gonna go ahead and divorce these things, pull them apart, grind all this stuff off, pull this thing apart. All right, so here is our old linkage piece here. You can see where the welds were on that. I got another one here that is not as long. I'll put them next to each other like this. You can see how that one is shorter. So this will be our new linkage piece. And then I'm gonna need to make another piece that goes on here out of this 1/4 inch thick piece of steel here. I have to drill some holes here, and then I'm going to be doing, so this is gonna be our bearing on the inside. It's a oilite bronze oil impregnated bearing. All right, so we've got our hole cut out in there. So this guy here will fit inside there. But you can see that this distance here is much greater than the actual thickness of this plate. So I'm gonna cut this thing, the bearing down. Ultimately, we're gonna have two bearings, one on either side. So I'm gonna cut both of these things down so that they will line up more like that. All right, so we've cut it down to approximately what we want, and I'm gonna put it on the sander and refine it a little bit more. All right, I've got this thing sort of tacked up here. It's kind of crude, but I'm hoping it will work. I'm just trying to make sure we get something that works on this thing at this point. So I'm gonna go ahead and try and fit this on the bike. All right, so we've got it just sort of roughly in here at this point, and you can kind of see how now this will rotate around here just fine. I'm gonna make sure that the caliper itself, the brake pads and everything will line up. All right, so caliper is on. Now we can kind of see wheel spins and all that stuff. This would move freely from the suspension, but once we apply the brake, this is just gonna slide and slam into that, right? So we need a brace between here, but the brace needs to be able to articulate as well to a degree so that we can simultaneously brake and have the suspension function. So that is my next step. Now I've got this portion done, the part we've been working on. Now I want to add an extension onto the end here. And this, I'm going to attach a little heim joint to that, and that's going to be the part that's going to be the beginning of our little brace that will go to our fork. It'll help hold this brake caliper in place. So here's our brake caliper bracket so far. It's coming out pretty well. We just welded this thing on here. I've got this tapped so I can thread this little heim joint on there. All right, so there is that. And so now I've got to sort of mock up my next step, which is connecting this to another heim joint, a little bar, connecting bar in between. All right, and from the scrap bin, we've got this 1/2-inch tube. I'm gonna use this, cut a piece off of there. This will be our little bar. All right, so then we'll be looking at something similar to that once we get it all together. All right, now it's time to come over to our lathe. I've got a little piece of 1/2-inch rod here chopped up. Drill and tap that guy so we can thread it, and that will get utilized in our brace with our heim joints. All right, so I've gone and machined up 2 of these guys. Got a little sort of bevel in there, and then a hole drilled through the center. And I'm gonna go ahead and tap these guys. I'm gonna do 1 left-handed thread and 1 right-handed thread. So check that out, nice and threaded in there. And this is a 1/4 28, so fine thread, 1/4 inch. All right, so we've got these tapped now. And the idea is you notice I've switched to a square tube instead of this round tube. That's so that we can get a wrench on the actual tube to help tighten this thing up. I made these so that this will fit right down inside this tube, like so, like so. And then I can weld these things up and we got a nice little tube. These guys go on the end. It's gonna be epic. Epic, bro. All right, so here's our piece we just made. Should be a thread, I'm not sure which one's which. Look at this. This is some professional grade stuff right here. I mean, I am impressing myself. All right, and I've got another little piece that I machined out, and I've threaded this as well. And this is going to get welded onto the inside of the fork leg. And this is our attachment point, the other side of our brace. It'll work just like that. Pretty sweet. Just weld this onto the leg, and we're pretty much done. All right, so I've got the front end off the bike here. And if we come around here, I've got that little guy. I'm gonna weld it on right here. Now I've got some paint on our new pieces here. Go ahead and reassemble all this stuff. It is a brilliant thing to be able to make something yourself. There's nothing more satisfying than making your own thing and having it work. So cool. We've got this piece here. Time to press our new bearings in there. Make sure this threaded thing is still working here. Good, good, good. Put a bearing on either side here. This will be our final assembly, essentially. All right, there's our bearing. All pressed together now. We're approaching final assembly now. Get this thing on the bike. Get this guy in here. Isn't that just lovely looking? Oh. And now the answer you've been waiting for, does this actually work? Yes. Yes, it does. Oh, so much better than it was. The bike is flipping rideable now, whereas before it was not rideable. You couldn't ride it. The wheel would just tilt. Now it's just solid, straight, and we're so happy because this is a lot of work for it not to work when you get done with it. So super thrilled. This is how you properly do a brake on a homemade, you know, front suspension contraption thing. That little brace, it's just key to making all this work, and that little bearing in there. So brake works, wheel stays straight when you're braking. Do we still have suspension? That's the other question. So here's full compress right there, and then there's full extension. Is it perfectly sorted out at this point? Not really. That's probably another thing I need to fine tune as I ride it and figure out how to tune this thing. I may need more springs, etc., different springs, that sort of thing. So this is much better than it was, but still, you can see the wheel does tilt. a little bit. The whole front end just moves just a little bit when you apply the brake. And it's because the brake is on just the one side of the wheel. If we had dual rotors on the front, I don't think this would be such an issue. And if I ever were to do another Springer front end, I'd either have no brakes or dual brakes. No single rotor brakes on a Springer. It imbalances the whole thing, and that's the problem. The suspension is able to pull to one side because of the spring here. There's some rotation in that spring or flex up here on the spring a little bit, and that allows the wheel to pull to the side just a little bit. If we had a brake on both sides of the wheel, then you'd have equal force on both sides of the wheel and it wouldn't tilt. I'm thrilled. I'm not like super stoked because this isn't perfect, but I'm thrilled that it's usable now. So huge improvements on the Grom Reaper today. How safe the thing is now, I don't know, but it is safer, I can tell you that. I'll let you know as I ride it if it's reasonable or not. All right, so one of the things I'm learning from this experience of building the Grom Reaper is that it takes a long time to build a vehicle from scratch if you're gonna do it correctly or even attempt to do it correctly, because this thing, I built the frame, the forks, the whole freaking thing except for that wheel and engine. We made everything on this bike and it took a long time, a lot longer than I wanted it to. And at this point, I mean, realistically, I have a decent rolling prototype here. I realize it's all painted up at this point just because we had that motorcycle show to get it into. But realistically, before I'm even ready to drive this thing, there's a lot of extra work to be done on it. The lesson here is if you're planning on making your own motorcycle or a vehicle, like plan on spending a long time doing it because it takes a long time to get it, all the little bugs out of it. That's what we're working on now. We're in the bug working phase. So the front end is way more complex than I really had planned it to be when I first drafted this project out. Am I proud of it at this point? Yes, I am. I think it's pretty cool. Have I learned more than I thought I would? Yes, I definitely have. And have I learned stuff I'm going to use on other projects in the future? Yes, for sure. So am I happy about it? Yeah, totally happy. Is it ready to ride yet? No, we still got to get the VIN number for it. This is a blank slate. The state doesn't know anything about this. It's not legal to ride on the road. You need to get a VIN number for it, and there's a whole process for that. The ECU on this, we still need to send that out and get that reprogrammed, but I want to fire this thing up first. We haven't even fired it up yet, and just see what it runs like now. We can have some kind of an idea when we get the ECU back if it runs any different. So I've made my adjustments here. I'm hoping these are pretty close to the final adjustments. Another phase, of course, is going to be once we start riding it, things will literally start shaking loose on it, and there'll be adjustments to be made there. I am certain of that. So still a bit of ways to go on this Grom, but I'm pretty happy with it so far. I'm looking forward to riding. I think it's going to be pretty fun to ride. Thanks for watching this. Good luck on your own projects. We'll see you next time.